Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome back to Wall Street Silver. Joining us today is Pyotr Kurzin. He is a geopolitical strategist and a podcaster. Welcome to Wall Street Silver, Pyotr.
Thanks a lot. I'm great. Very glad to be on.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a pleasure having you come down to Wall Street Silver. So, Pyotr, let's talk about geopolitical issues around the world. Russia just came out this week and cut production of their oil, and it sent oil prices up quite a bit. What does
Mm.
this mean to you, and what does it mean geopolitically?
Well, so this is in response to the price cap that the Europeans have imposed. I actually wrote a piece on this on my Substack back in December when it was being announced. And surprisingly, it's actually, for the EU at least, happened quite quickly. So what this has basically meant is that the Russians are going to be cutting about 500,000 barrels a day, which is almost 5% of the production,
Wow.
or 0.5, 0.5% of the world's supply, basically, to what the Deputy Prime Minister, Energy Minister, I think it was, he said, destructive energy policy of countries of the collective West. So just continuing the Russian anti-rhetoric that we've seen the Kremlin pushing against, any country that's joined the Western sanctions, NATO, and so on. In terms of energy production, I would look at how the US, obviously in the EU, respond in terms of where they begin to try and find a replacement output. The Azerbaijanis, the Saudis, obviously two main ones, but I've also been reading reports about Venezuela potentially being, I wouldn't say being lifted, all the sanctions, but there is some discussion about, because Venezuela is the lesser of the two evils.
Right.
There's been some degree of normalization between US and European relations to Maduro's government in Venezuela. You could even see that maybe as a potential, and I use this very loosely though, a potential source of increased oil production in the next, I don't know, quarter, half a year, to watch. So definitely Russia continues to be, constrained in its output, but it's just going to find other buyers rather. India has increased its uptake of Russian energy and use, albeit at a reduced amount. It'll just be a redirection of resources, but Russia may lose out on the overall profits it makes from those.
Well said. Now, Piotr, there's also talks about Japan doubling its military budget up to 2%.
Mm-hmm.
What does this mean to their debt, and how can they afford it? Like, how does this affect the rest of the world as well?
Well, look, there's two main points about this debt conversation that we're seeing: debt limitation, or debt ceilings, but also, more importantly, debt sustainability.
Right.
Most of your viewers should know, or I encourage people to read about it, is that debt isn't good, but it's not the most structurally or systemic risk to an economy. You can manage it. It's not good. I'm not saying we agree with, $3 trillion worth or 100% of debt to GDP as the US is approaching. This isn't good. But the point is that Japan has carried this quite high. Well, I think it's like 250%, isn't it, for Japan, or 180, something ridiculous. But
Yeah, something
anyway, they've
crazy.
managed, they've managed to do that for a while. And ultimately, they are still such a cornerstone of the global economy as well. This increase of defense is one that the Prime Minister Kishida, who was the successor to the late Shinzo Abe, who obviously introduced quantitative easing and Abenomics, as it was known. He's more of a foreign policy nerd, so he's emphasizing the importance of national security. This is a doubling to a defense of 2%. Which is for Japan quite a lot, because they've retained what's known as only defense first. I think that's how they call it. But basically what that means is that Japan only has a military, a navy, sort of those kinds of capabilities for defense only, or deterrence. They don't have an offensive force. But what Kishida and some policymakers are thinking is, because of North Korea, which I think we're going to come to, is a concern for their economic interests and just strategical survivability. So they feel that they need to develop potentially retaliatory capacity, so missiles that can retaliate against any strike, that and they don't necessarily have that in as much of a need as they think they need, because of China as well. So that's where the budget is being applied to, most likely. But as to whether or not they can finance it, I think so. It's going to obviously put pressure on the economy, but Japan's also got demographics issues and all sorts. So yeah.
Well said. There's also been a lot of rhetoric of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. How will the U.S. react in your view, or is the Chinese just fear mongering to get what they want?
Well, I mean, we need an entire conversation on this, and I had a chat with Brigadier General Robert Spalding about this on
Cool.
my podcast. Yeah, he's more of a cynic when it comes to it. He thinks that China's going to invade, even possibly this year. He's not the only one. There's a few other U.S.
Right.
Senior military officials who think it could be coming. I don't think so. Because the global economy is not in China's favor. China has only just reopened. They've got a public health crisis in zero COVID's remnants now. The first protests in November that we saw against President Xi's premiership. He's never had to deal with anything like this before. And then there's the longer overarching demographic crisis, which is going to plague China. I'm not saying China's not going to be a massive force, but I'll put it this way, which was that for a long time, China watchers and analysts believe that China's demographic dividend, which is basically the benefits it gets from a growing population and therefore economic output, wouldn't come until late 2020s, early 2030s. Report came out a couple of weeks ago that basically said China's population has decreased for the first time in its history by 850,000. And whilst that's not going to overnight mean anything, it's significant for China's capacity to grow as an EME or emerging economy. They're forecast, I think, by the IMF to grow by 4%, which is much more advanced economy territory. So China's definitely slowing down. And therefore, I just don't know whether right now is the time the CCP would want to conduct a large scale, like very large scale, double the size of D-Day or Normandy, just for context, is what they need, would be within their interest at the moment. So I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but I don't think it's going to happen for a good couple of years.
Do you think they're also watching what's happening with Russia very closely, and they don't want the whole world to oust them? So do you think that's why they don't want to invade?
Well, I mean, comparisons between China, Soviet Union, China, Russia is China is a massive economy. It's far more of a adversary or competitor to the West, to the United States, than Russia has been, even in the Soviet Union, right? Or will ever be, because and China therefore needs to be treated with respect, but they still are not unaware of the implications that a large-scale sanctions program or just collective response from the West. Everyone was shocked by how strong the West came out and quickly in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So the Chinese are very conscious of that. And equally, just for context, so Russia's trade to China is about 16% of their GDP. Russia's to China 2%, more or less.
Right.
That's not even 10%, 5% of what the Chinese rely on from the collective West, right? United States, one of the largest partners, Japan, South Korea, Philippines, all countries that are affiliated with US alignment, right? So China's not going to risk all that. They may be wanting to decouple or create an alternative financial system and get off SWIFT and create their own SIPs or whatever it's called. But that's not going to happen yet. And therefore, China's not going to jeopardize its economic interests for one reckless, revanchist power that is Russia. So they're definitely watching what the West and everybody is doing with Russia. That's why I'll land with this last point, which is that this is why we've only seen them come out in strong words, but not action, right? They've released a bunch of diplomatic statements and wording. We're against NATO. NATO expansionism, NATO imperialism. The West is the problem. Poor Russia. Well, hang on. Why aren't you supporting Russia militarily or financially then? Because they haven't. They've given them nothing other than nice words. So watch where they put their actions, not their words.
So
whatever the expression is.
that's well said. So Pyotr, Saudi Arabia too might move away from the US petrodollar, and let's say they move to the yuan. What will that do to the West's way of life? And would we see massive inflation? What's your thoughts?
This is actually something that I need to read up on more.
Right.
I think this is of anything that could be potentially quite a significant shift in the power dynamics when it comes to geopolitics and energy. This one could potentially have an impact. Again, I think it's very important to keep time scale in mind here. None of this is going to happen yet. Saudi Arabia's got its own concerns when it comes to the growing deviation away from non-renewables by the West, by America, this desire for the green recovery and this sort of thing. So Saudi Arabia is going to continue to find its own more different client states. Diversification is key. China's going to continue to buy that oil. The visit by President Xi in December was quite notable because it also resulted in a tension between Iran and China, which are long-standing partners, supposedly. So I definitely think the West will be watching this with quite a big concern, or wariness at least. Do I think it's going to cause, large-scale shocks to the oil market overnight? No. But you may see a bit of a volatility around oil that you haven't seen for a bit. But that's why I mentioned other countries like Venezuela or Azerbaijan or other countries that are not maybe best choices, but they offer a slightly more predictability than say Saudi Arabia. But again, this is opportunism for the Saudis. They are doing what any middle power or country that's quite powerful but not a great power like America, for example, are doing, right? Turkey's doing it, Iran's doing it, Saudi Arabia wants to do it. So if they can leverage their comparative advantage, which in this case is the oil, then they will. But I don't think it's only going to be a disconnect from the West. And I think the Saudis will still keep the US as a preferred client or partner than other countries at the moment. But it depends. I would watch China and Saudi for sure.
Now, a lot of people are talking about Armenia and Azerbaijan. Can you give us a little bit of a historical context of what's happening there and how this will affect investors?
Yeah, I gave a whole interview of this on another channel, but this is I think that the South Caucasus and the sort of northern Middle Eastern area of Iran, Turkey, where it borders the other two countries you mentioned, is one to watch. Nagorno-Karabakh, which is the disputed region between Armenia and Azerbaijan, goes back obviously a long time, but more recently in the 1990s there was a war because there was a region that broke away, claimed independence. Azerbaijan didn't like that. They attacked. Armenia came to the defense of this region because it was mainly Armenians who lived there. Then Russia supported Armenia. Ever since then, Azerbaijan has become a massive petrostate because they benefited from all the investment in the oil fields in the Caspian Sea. And Azerbaijan was actually the fastest growing economy for 14 years between 2000 and 2014, and has now doubled its military budget, way more powerful than Armenia. And because Russia's distracted with Ukraine, they're not coming to the defense of Armenia. And so Azerbaijan continues to pressure, conduct skirmishes, strikes, whatever it is, into Armenia and this other region, which is causing obviously a lot of instability. Now, Turkey, before the earthquake, was conducting its own military activities in Syria, and they're very close with Azerbaijan. So there's a general shift in the balance of power in this area. And why this is important for investors or for the natural commodities market, particularly energy, is because you have the southern gas corridor, which basically is three main pipelines that go from the Caspian through Turkey, Georgia. Two of them go towards Greece and Italy, and then the other one goes down to a southern town in Turkey. I forget what it's called, but it borders the Mediterranean, and that's where you've got a lot of other countries like Israel and a few other, Lebanon a little bit, accessing it. And it was obviously shipped off to other places, but the Horn of Africa makes use of it from there. So this has a large potential implication for the sustainment in supply of energy, gas from Azerbaijan. They make up potentially about 10% of energy provisions to Europe. So you've seen the European Union delegations out in Azerbaijan even as recently as last month. They think just check it up, trying to make sure that the problem with this is that Armenia is actually a democratic country versus Azerbaijan, which is more autocratic. So there's this conflict of interest, which is the European Union are like, yes, we're going to take care of Armenia, we're going to protect you and your democratic values, but then they're like, realism. Self-interest. We got to hang out with Azerbaijan as well because of the energy. So it shows you again the implications of Russia and the war, and how there's this shift away. So I would definitely watch, and then of course Iran and the domestic situation and the tension that's putting on Azerbaijan and Iran. So watch this area, I would say, because there's a lot of independent moving parts that are coming together to create quite a big geopolitical mess.
Very interesting. Well, Pyotr, we want to thank you so much for coming down to Wall Street Silver. It's been an absolute pleasure. And hopefully the next few months we can have you back and we can talk about the geopolitical risks in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Talk to you soon.